97.1. So the Lions are still looking for an offensive coordinator. Today's Free Press, Dave Birkett, really, really good piece on the situation, some of the guys they were interested in and where they've gone and kind of the direction they're pointed in. So I wanted to bring on Dave to talk about it because, well, I had some additional questions. Dave, how you doing again?
Doing good, Mike. How are you?
I'm good. I really like the piece, Dave, because it makes you think, and I had a couple of questions, and I said, okay, that's it. Let's just talk to Dave today. I wanted to start at the top. Monken, Hackett, Sarkisian, all off the board. How serious do you believe the Lions were with any of those three?
Yeah, I wish I had a clear answer that they did or did not offer any of those guys a job. I do not know that. I know they interviewed Nate Hackett. He was a guy that I think early on a lot of people thought would be a candidate up here because there's some ties to Matt Patricia, I guess, through Doug Marrone. I would think that he was probably the most serious of those candidates. But I don't know if they wanted one of those guys and they turned them down, and now they're on to their second choices. But all signs are sure pointing to someone that's maybe still coaching in the playoffs right now as being the guy that they ultimately have their eye on to replace Jim Bob Cooter.
Well, and Sully's eyes have rolled to the back of his head because it's New England, and Sully gets nauseous every time that they do this. But you highlighted a couple of guys here, including the wideout coach Chad O'Shea, tight ends coach Nick Caley, and Jerry Shupinski or whatever it is. I mean, give me a rundown on these three. These are names nobody really knows. Your spin on these guys.
Well, Chad O'Shea, he would be the most experienced of that group, and I would venture to say the most likely. I mean, he's the guy that had Josh McDaniels taken a job that everyone sort of had pointed to and said that he's going to be the guy that replaces Josh McDaniels as the play caller in New England. I think he's been with the Patriots about 10 years. He coached all over college football before that. He's been coaching for, since the mid-'90s. So he's been in this thing a while, pretty experienced guy. I don't think he's ever called plays, though, in any of his stops. Well regarded from his time in New England, obviously what he's done with not always having the best talent in the receiving corps there. So I would think that he would be the most likely of that group. Caley's a guy that I had heard him sort of early on back in the, early part of the season when, I guess it looked like that this might happen, that they might fire Jim Bob Cooter. And he's young. I don't think it'll end up being him. And same thing with Jerry Shupinski, he's sort of the assistant quarterbacks coach over there. I mean, another young guy that just doesn't have a lot of experience, but they're both pretty well regarded in coaching circles. And probably some of that is just because they're coaching under Bill Belichick. And it seems like everyone who coaches over there, eventually moves up into a higher role.
Now, is it wrong? And look, I fully admit it. It's bias. When I see teams hire guys who have never called a play in their life, red flags go up to me. I get very scared by it. I mean, would you term O'Shea a risky hire?
I don't think O'Shea would be risky quite like the other two. I mean, I think the other two, you definitely have some legitimate risk / concerns there, just because they're still pretty young when it comes to being where they are in their careers. I mean, O'Shea's like I said, he's a pretty well-respected coach and somebody that I think ultimately, will get a coordinator job. Maybe not necessarily this cycle, but the Patriots have certainly been grooming him for that. If I remember right, look, a lot of times in Game 4 of the preseason, the coordinators are sort of planning for the week one opponent, and at least in Bill Belichick, what he's done is he's sort of given sort of the next in line guy the opportunity to call plays and handle some of that. And if I remember right, I think Chad O'Shea did some of that for the Patriots because, again, he was sort of the next guy that was being groomed for replacing Josh McDaniels. And that's not to say he's ready to call plays on a full-time basis, but I think he's had enough experience and worked with enough positions, wide receivers, tight ends, special teams. He's done enough in his coaching career that I wouldn't have big concerns about him.
Well, plus he's a Patriot, so that's an automatic interview with what's going on here.
Well, and you know what? I mean, I think, look, I'd like to see Matt Patricia go out of his comfort zone a little bit.
Yes.
And talk to and look, he did. I mean, Steve Sarkisian was not a guy that was, he didn't have any of these deep Patriots ties that a lot of the people on his staff did, or deep Syracuse ties. But, that's life in the NFL, that a lot of times these guys get jobs based on who you know, and you've worked with this guy before, and so you feel comfortable with him. And ultimately, I think both Chad O'Shea and Shane Waldron, the guy from the Rams, they were both with the Patriots. And that's
yeah, you got me excited. You go, wow, he's going to the McVay tree, and then, oops, worked 5 years in New England. I go, this is unbelievable.
Well, and maybe look, I don't know a ton about Shane Waldron. I've reached out to some people that he's worked with in the past to try to learn a little bit more. Certainly, you'd think working under McVay that you've learned some, you've expanded some of what maybe you just learned in New England. He was a relatively young guy in New England, and he had 2 stops in New England. Actually, he worked under Charlie Weiss at Notre Dame, so that tells you how long ago he was in New England. He worked both before and after his Notre Dame stops there, but he's been a few places since. So, look, I think Waldron is, people had mentioned his name back when the Lions played the Rams, and Sean McVay had nothing but great things to say about him, said he thinks he's ready for an offensive coordinator job when we got him on the teleconference. So I think those are 2 guys that I'd be keeping an eye on in the playoffs this weekend if I was a Lions fan.
Now, this is the one where I want to make Sully sick, because I don't want this to be true, but I just have a bad feeling he's in play. And when I saw you write it, no, I mean, Dave, when I see you write something,
I know where you're going, Mike.
There's credibility there. I mean, nobody's better. And it's, look, George Godsey was given a gift job by this organization when he was flat on his ass and out of Houston. They brought him here as some defensive video quality assistant, whatever it was. Then they get rid of the QB coach. He slides in there. Now they get rid of the OC coach. Look, I'm afraid that Godsey would be in the mix here, but I have a feeling I'm not wrong to be afraid of that happening.
Well, and Mike, I think we talked a couple weeks ago, and maybe we mentioned him as a candidate because, it just, look, you've got 2 former play callers on your staff right now, and Jeff Davidson and George Godsey. And Davidson was supposedly sitting in on some of the interviews that the Lions were having, so I would assume they want to keep him in his spot. And Godsey's a guy that, yes, he worked with the Patriots when both Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia were there, and I went on to call plays for Bill O'Brien, another Patriots guy, and he had the play calling duties removed from him in his last season in Houston. And then you're right, he's worn a couple different hats here. Obviously, Matthew Stafford didn't have a great year here with George as his quarterbacks coach. But I mean, if one of those other guys doesn't work out, I don't know the exact direction the Lions want to go right now, but I would assume it's a guy that's still coaching in the playoffs. If one of those guys doesn't work out, Godsey seems like a fallback candidate to me.
Do you still view this as a desirable opportunity, that working with Stafford is still something that would get someone here? Do you think that's changed?
Well, I don't think it's quite as desirable as, the guys that you mentioned off the top, right? Todd Monken and Nate Hackett and Sarkisian. Look, Sarkisian went back to Alabama. He wants to be a head coach again at some point, and he's got some ties with Nick Saban. Hackett, he's not going to be the play caller in Green Bay, but he is going to work with Aaron Rodgers. So, I don't know. Obviously, working with Aaron Rodgers is a little bit, more of a feather in your cap than working with Matthew Stafford, but you're not calling plays. Monken, same thing in Cleveland. I don't think he's going to be the play caller there. I think Freddie Kitchens said he's going to do that, but he is going to work with Baker Mayfield. So, I don't think the Lions, this job, working with Matthew Stafford, given everything that went on this year, both with the team and with the way the offense played, I don't think it's the most plum of positions, but you know what, it's better than some of the other ones that are still open, Miami and Cincinnati and some of those other ones. Doesn't say a lot about the Lions, but it is the best one that's out there right now.
Well, no, Dave, that's the other thing, and I know it's terrible to talk about it, but the attractiveness of a lot of these positions is directly tied to the job security of the coach. And if Patricia goes out and has a bad year next year, I don't care how long his contract is, there's a very high chance he ain't going to be here. So,
Mike,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say I was going to give you some credit. I mean, that's the last time we talked a couple of weeks ago. You had mentioned that. You said, how attractive is this job given the thinness or thickness of the ice that Patricia may be on right now. And look, again, I don't know if any of those guys turned the job down. I don't know if the Lions offered any of those guys that they had been linked to the job. I wish I had more clarity on that for you. Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia have not been responding to my text messages here of late. But no, I think you're right that, if you're let's just say you're Steve Sarkisian out there, right? And you don't know, you don't have this long history of working with the Matt Patricia.
I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, that job at Alabama, even with all the turnover they have, you do a great job there. That's a springboard to something great, and you're going to be there for a while if you're doing a really good job.
But that's the other reason the New England guys, Dave. It's pretty obvious. Kraft has promised McDaniels something that got him to come home, right? If Belichick goes, McDaniels is the head guy. All these New England guys get that elevated profile. If they don't land a guy like O'Shea, I think it tells you it's not a desirable job, and I think it tells you that Patricia's on really thin ice. That, to me.
Yeah, I would think, look, the fact that it hasn't happened, I know it's just 2 weeks, and, that's not a super long time, but we've seen all these other jobs open and then get filled. That, again, all signs right now point to the Lions waiting for somebody that's still coaching in the playoffs. If the playoffs end, or if this week, New England loses and the Rams lose and they don't hire one of these guys and they end up going back and hiring George Godsey or somebody else that's a free agent.
Sully just fell out of his chair. Oh, God.
Please don't say that, please.
I think that's when all of a sudden you look and you say, what happened here? Why did it take 3 weeks for you to hire this person that was available day one?
I can't wait to see Carlos's piece if they hire George Godsey.
What's funny is I think I told you this before. We had talked about this during the season, sort of. What's going to happen. And Carlos, he's been on the George Godsey train since December. And, I told him yesterday, or a couple days ago, I said, look, if the Lions hire George Godsey, if that's how it ends up, they're going to get killed publicly just for promoting this guy, internally and everything that's gone on. And Carlos said he doesn't think they would deserve to be killed, or he doesn't think they would be killed, maybe because that's just the style of offense that Matt Patricia wants, that he doesn't want this, high-flying, wide-open offense. He wants this conservative.
Yeah, the opposite of where the league is. Thanks a lot, Matt. Jesus.
And that's why I'm hoping, maybe not hoping, but that's why I think, if Shane Waldron is the guy, having worked under McVay the last couple of years, maybe there's some hope there. My read from talking to some people across the league is that, yes, the Lions want to have a power running game, but I think they also want to open up the vertical passing game a little bit. So I think whoever the hire is going to be will embody some of that. In his offense.
Dave, appreciate it as always. Great piece in the Freep today. We'll touch base when and if they actually hire somebody, all right?
All right, Mike. Sounds good. We'll talk to you.
You got it. Dave Birkett, the Freep. Go read his piece today. It's excellent. Winter is here. It means energy bills are rising.